Hello, my name is Georgia Zavati, and I'm a reporter at STUDENTV, which, as you may know, is owned by the non-profit organization Global Confederation of Romanian Students, with headquarters in Sweden. With me is Caitlin, today's guest, and she's here to discuss educational matters. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi.
I would like you to introduce yourself in a few words.
Let's see. My name is Caitlin, and I'm 23 years old, and I'm here in Uppsala, Sweden, studying cultural anthropology.
Okay. So where are you from?
I'm from the state of Colorado in the United States, specifically a town called Boulder, which is about an hour outside of the state's capital, Denver.
Okay. And what did you do in high school? What specialization did you have?
I went to, I'd say, a middle-sized high school. There were probably about 2,000 students.
Mm-hmm.
And high school in the United States is, for the most part, pretty generalized. Like, there's certain classes that everybody has to take, and there's like a standard track that you can go through high school with. I was part of a slightly specialized program. There's typically two different types of program in higher level or more academically advantaged high schools in the United States. One of them is advanced placement, or we call it AP,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is IB, which is International Baccalaureate.
Mm-hmm.
Advanced placement is typically the same subjects as the other students would study, but just they're a bit more difficult and they focus a bit more. An International Baccalaureate is based on the designs of an international program where you're supposed to be on the level with other high school students from around the world. I took classes from both IB and AP placement, but I liked the AP classes a bit better. They were just like more focused and a little bit more challenging.
Okay, yeah. And what were your interests in high school? What subjects?
I was definitely more drawn towards literature and history.
Okay.
I wasn't bad at science and math, but I always enjoyed myself a lot more in, things like world history or throughout high school we took different levels of literature.
Okay. And were there subjects you didn't especially appreciate?
We had to take a wide range of science classes, and perhaps not appreciate might be a funny word, but I was always much better at like physics, whereas things like biology and chemistry have never been a strong suit to me. So I guess I didn't do, those weren't classes that I enjoyed very much. And some of the, we had to take gym class, but we had to take sometimes strangely specialized gym classes.
Okay.
Centered around running or centered around racket sports, and depending on whether or not you liked the focus of the class, it could be fun or not.
I see. And did you have subjects that were more practical?
I think that, American high schools, the goal is sort of that everyone will have a basis on which, these are the standard things that everybody should know. But I think probably the more practical things that we learned as far as everyday life is, math and some elements of science, and we did have some sort of, life classes where they tried to teach us,
okay.
We had to do money management.
Wow.
I don't know. I think it could have been done a lot better, but I suppose they were trying to be practical.
Okay. And did you feel the need for other more practical courses?
I think it's a common response between a lot of people I went to school with that, why did nobody teach us how to do our taxes? We felt like that should have been something we should have been taught in school, or how to get a job. There were things. It's good to have a strong academic base, but there are things about actually living in the world that maybe it would be better if they taught us more about that in school, or in health class, not just about, like, you know, the standard things like, you know, sex ed and puberty and all that, but, like, how to have, like, a healthy lifestyle and, you know, things like that.
Okay, yeah. And did you sometimes wish you could study more in a certain subject and felt the school didn't give you that possibility?
Yeah, I think sometimes, because like I said, I was much stronger in literature and history, and I would have rather have taken more of those classes, but I had a certain amount of science and math that I had to take. So I would have loved to take more literature and history, but I understand and I do appreciate that I have a basis in math and science now.
Okay, yes. And who do you think is more responsible for a child's education? Are the parents more responsible or the school?
I think the parents are pretty responsible early on. Mm-hmm. Like, when your kid is little and they're first getting into school, I think the parents are a big part of teaching them, like, how you go to school, how you do homework, how you become a student. And then I think as you go on, like, parents might not know as much. Like, parents should still be supportive, but, like, once you get into middle or high school, I think it's much more the school that is reinforcing, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to do it. But I think it's been tested in many ways that, like, having supportive parents, you generally do end up as a better student. But I've also known people who come from maybe not so good households that are still brilliant and great students. But, like, my parents were always really supportive, and they helped me with homework when I needed it. And I think that did contribute to me being a good student. But I also went to a very good school.
Okay. What do you believe is the role of the teacher in the learning process?
I think teachers are really important because, and I think a good teacher can, like, make a class, and a bad teacher can break a class, so to say. Because in a lot of subjects, like, they're going to be the first person that you hear this from, and it's going to stick with you. And I know people who, like, have sort of bad feelings towards math because their first math teacher was really scary.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I know that I've become passionate about things that I might not have been passionate about just because my teacher was so passionate about it, and their passion, like, came through in their teaching. Mm-hmm. So, I do think the teacher is very important.
Definitely. And were there subjects that you ended up liking? You said you did, but which, like?
Especially, I think topics like in literature and history. But those were my very passionate teachers. But even in science, like, we'd learn about, like, something in physics that, because our teacher was so animated, or because he gave such an interesting experiment to do it with, that it became a lot more interesting than if I had just read it in a textbook.
Yeah. Yes. But were there subjects you also come to not like as your classmates or so? Because of the teacher?
I not as much as other people, but I think the most, like, intense and intimidating teachers I ever had were math teachers. Okay. And I think that, especially in the higher level math, like calculus, I think that definitely affected my, how much I got out of it and how much energy I felt I had towards figuring things out.
Okay. Yes. So what would the ideal teacher be like, in your view? What qualities should one have?
In the high school setting, teachers are typically at the point where they are allowed to specialize. So I think you should be a teacher in a subject that you understand and you like. Mm-hmm. Because if you like the subject, then you can encourage your students to like the subject. So I think, and it's hard to say this because I know how hard teachers work, but I think you have to be somewhat energetic and passionate. And I think one of the most important things, though, is having a gauge, being able to understand whether or not your students are understanding you. Because I think the more classes can become really difficult when the students aren't getting it, but the teacher doesn't realize that, and then the students suffer, and then the classroom environment gets more tense. So I think a good teacher has to be really in tune with the students and what they're understanding and why they're understanding it or why they're not understanding something.
But you said also, you brought up that high school teachers, but since we're here for a master's program, you've also been through the first part of university. What could you tell me about that part?
Yeah, obviously university professors are highly specialized, but they often still teach, like, the introductory courses. And I think one of the most exciting things about beginning university is the teachers who introduce you to a topic and then show you all the amazing things that you can do with it. Like, I've always enjoyed when, a professor is like, well, this is an introduction to this, and here's what I've done in my research. And I was sitting in the same place as you, and yet I got to do all these amazing things, and you could too. So I think a good professor, a good teacher is always inspiring their students to, like, do even more, to figure out, like, to make even bigger conclusions. And
I'm sorry, I'm jumping from subject to subject, but how did you get to study anthropology? As in, from high school, what inspired you in high school so that you would go to university to study anthropology?
Actually, my final fourth year of high school, in the United States, I took an elective social studies course on anthropology.
Okay, yeah.
Which gave an overview of the four different fields of anthropology, which I won't go into here, but basically it gave a really nice overview, and it felt like something that I was passionate about and that I could do. So it's what I pursued in university, and it's worked out pretty well.
So, during high school, going back to high school, did you feel like you could express yourself freely, or did you feel restricted in any way?
I'd say one thing that I have to acknowledge about the United States is that we do have a lot of freedom of expression. Even though we might complain about our own restrictions, we have a lot of freedom of expression. So within limits, we were allowed to complain about our teachers, complain about our classes, complain about the school, as long as it was considered like a fair criticism. So, and we could go to maybe a higher authority in our school and say, like, we don't feel like we're being taught properly. And somebody would actually respond to us.
That's good.
Yeah.
And what do you feel about the American education system, seeing as we got to this point?
Unfortunately, the American education system is not very consistent. I was lucky to live in a community that really supported its schools, and so I went to good schools who had funding, who cared about their students, but unfortunately not everybody in the United States lives in situations like that, so some schools are more or less funded than others. So I believe that I had very good schools, and I had a good education experience, but it's not consistent throughout the United States.
Okay. Understand. And what would you change if you could?
I think what they've been attempting to do for quite a while is sort of create a standard by which all schools are held to, but they've done it mainly academically, and I think one of the strangest things that they've done is funding is decided by test scores. So, like, the better test scores a school gets, the more funding that they get. And I sort of understand the intentions behind that, but I think it can also put more challenged schools, sort of, they get stuck. So, I think if every school had a better base standard of funding, then there would be more opportunities.
And since you got to the test course, do you believe that grades that you receive in that students receive in school reflect the actual level of knowledge they have?
No. I mean, in some ways, yes, but in general, no. Because the tricky thing about education is there has to be some rubric, some way of examining students. And even though everybody's a little bit different, they all have to be held to some sort of standard. So I think there are, by some metrics, can you read, can you write, and things like that probably are indicative of, how your education is going. But some ways that were tested can be, well, how well did you memorize this material? Or how good are you at understanding the test questions, rather than the material itself? So, I think some schools are trying to reevaluate that, but in general, it's it's sort of just, people are, the common complaint is people are teaching to the test, rather than teaching for the material.
Yes. Now going to other aspects of school. What do you believe, or what's your opinion on mandatory school uniform?
It's interesting, because I've never had to wear a uniform in school, but there have been situations where I could sort of understand why schools have uniforms. Because when you don't have a standard uniform, there often has to be a dress code. And dress codes people can get upset about that, or they'll say that things have been, it's been imposed unfairly, but also not having uniforms allows for more individual expression, which can be important for students, so.
Yeah. Oh, how much do you regard that personal expression?
I don't know, I think it was definitely the way that people were able to dress was important to them. And you could definitely identify things about people the way they dress, in high school, the kids who were more artsy or the kids who were more into sports. There was sort of a classification by how they chose to express themselves, and I think you could take positives or negatives from that. Maybe it enforced the clique attitude, but, yeah.
Or do you have extracurricular activities?
In high school, I was in marching band, which is a very American thing, I think.
Okay.
The marching band is, I guess, it's somewhat self-explanatory, but people with brass instruments, so you the more trumpets and trombones and everything. And you march in formation and play at the same time. I did not actually play an instrument. I was in the color guard.
Color guard?
Yes. So we spun flags and batons and sometimes swords. And we were sort of more the entertainment aspects or the theme aspects. But even though I didn't play an instrument, we were all a unit. And that was something that it was a lot of time, and we became very close.
Okay, yeah. And what passions do you have?
It sounds very cheesy, but I think I have a passion for just learning things and finding new information.
It doesn't sound cheesy, it just sounds and none of the people that I've talked to until now said this.
Yeah,
so
I love
it's unique.
I love facts, and I love learning new things and being able to connect ideas. And so I read a lot. I love reading different topics. Even though I study anthropology and I tend to be more of a social science person, I still like learning about space technology or what new amphibian species are being discovered around the world and things like that.
Yes. And do you like reading?
Yes, I read a lot. I've always read a lot since I could read.
And what genre would you say is your favorite?
I think I've always been more drawn to the fantasy genre. But especially when I was younger, I read a lot of fantasy, and I think I do still read fantasy today, but I'm also, I like contemporary fiction.
Okay.
So, like, right now I'm very into, like, crime and detective novels, but previously I've read a lot of contemporary and even historical fiction.
Okay, nice. And between books and films, what would you prefer?
I think it can depend on my temperament.
Okay.
Because if I'm gonna read a book, that's something like I like to do when I have time and energy to like really get into it. But I tend to watch like films and television when I'm doing other things as well, or when I'm sitting down with people. But books are sort of like my solitary time.
Okay, yes.
So for myself, I guess maybe my more personal moments, I like to read.
And I'd like to talk about a bit about people in general, like qualities. First, yourself. What qualities would you say you have?
I think I'm curious, but along with that, I can be stubborn. And I'm very passionate, and I get very emotional about things, but and I try my best to be a very caring person, but I also am acknowledging that sometimes it can be good to be selfish and acknowledge yourself, especially if you care for others a lot.
And now, thinking of this, what qualities would you say are more important in a person to have?
I know one of the classic answers is honesty, but I don't know if honesty is maybe the right term. I think people should be genuine. You don't necessarily have to tell me the truth all the time, because I've been in situations where I've known that the truth would make things worse. But I think you need to be as genuine as possible with people and show them who you are.
Truly. And do you make friendships easily, or would you say you're more selective?
I think I'm very friendly, and I make acquaintances very easily. I consider myself friendly with a lot of people. Like, there's a lot of people who I'll pass and be like, oh, hi, or and I can have a short conversation with. But I think I'm selective in who is like my friend, and I've learned to be more selective in who I share very deep things with, and who I share the more complicated parts of my life with. But I think it's okay to be friendly and be open with people, but yeah, I've learned to have somebody be your friend, that's more of a special thing.
And now, what do you like to do in your spare time besides reading and...
Well, since we've been here in Uppsala, I've been trying to be outside as when I can and explore while the weather's nice. And that's something I would do as well at home, because back in Colorado, I lived in I lived outside of the city, and I lived with my parents, and we had dogs, so I would often be outside. So here I'm trying to continue that, and I'm trying to be outside, and I like to, but I do like to watch films, and I like to research things. That sounds very academic, but I do look things up and try and learn things, and I wasn't able to bring my violin with me to Sweden, but beforehand I played the violin, and so I like music very much. I'm always looking for new music as well.
And is there anything here that isn't... I know how moving to another place might stop some activities, but were there other activities that were started?
Yeah, I've been, we don't have to go too much into this, but I've been more involved with the student life here in Uppsala and helping out with the student nation that I joined and trying to be more a part of that organization. And I've also been volunteering with the short film festival that Uppsala is holding this year.
Volunteering?
Yeah, volunteering a lot, and it's a good way to meet new people as well.
Where would you like to travel, or what country or city have you visited and you liked?
I've done quite a bit of traveling in Northern Europe now, but I haven't been to Southern Europe yet, or Eastern Europe, really, at least past. I've been to Latvia, but I haven't been south.
Yes.
So I'd really love to explore more of Southern Europe, and possibly maybe to run away from the cold for a little bit. That would be a good option. But I think I'm especially interested in Italy and Greece. There's so much history there, and I've always wanted to go there.
It is.
And I have some friends from Portugal, and I'd love to visit there as well.
Yes. And do you believe what do you believe a model citizen should be like?
Very good question. I don't know. This might come from my background as an anthropologist, but I think the idea of a community is very important. And there's different levels of community. You could say, like, technically we are a global community. But also, I think, starting simple, like, if you're in a community, you should be looking out for each other. There should be, like, everyone should have the goal of keeping things nice and in working order and looking out, like, I guess I definitely think I think that the idea of the collective is something that can be very positive, and that we can take care of each other. Like, individuals can, go out and do whatever they want, but I think we've lost a bit of the collective in a lot of ways. And I think being a good citizen means caring about the health and the function and the happiness of the place that you are a part of.
Nice. Now, since you have said about the citizen and the well-being of others, do you consider it's important to protect the environment in which we live?
Yes, I really do. And part of that, I know, comes from the fact that I come from a community that's very environmentally minded, and I come from a family that's very environmentally minded. But I was also really inspired by a course that I took in my bachelor program, my first degree, where I had a sociology professor who encouraged us to have local knowledge. That the best way to care for the environment is for every locality, or let's say a community that you're a citizen of, you should have knowledge of the place that you live in and how to care for it and best practices for that. And if that was replicated everywhere, that could bring about a lot of change. And not just to say that, like, on a local level, but I think if there were both local level actions as well as global actions, it would be a lot more productive.
And what measures would you take in this sense? So, what measures do you take?
Like, one big thing that I've been taught in my life is that you should always try and, compost food materials. And especially if you can save them and use them for gardening, then it's, like, doubly good. And trying not to use as many unnecessary materials or, like, create unnecessary waste. And, if the lights don't need to be on, you don't have to leave them on. Which, as a child, I had to learn, like, the dark wasn't so bad,
Yeah.
And things like that, or just noticing that, like, if something doesn't need to be running, why is it running? And I know it can be difficult because the average person isn't using so much energy compared to, like, big businesses and things on a global scale, but I think we have to, like I said, I think we have to create patterns on a more local level so that they can grow.
Yeah. Now, going to a more, to another topic, information. When you're researching for a project, or back in school, or now at university, where do you choose to inform yourself from? Do you search books or internet?
Depending on the type of source. Like, if it's something that I know I can easily access a book about, I would love to be able to actually find it in a book. It's like when you have access to a campus library at a university, it can be really awesome. But if it's something that I know might be more like an article or a journal or something like that, I'd always go through, once again, having the university catalog, I think it's been amazing because universities will have access to everything, and Google Scholar is an option, but I always try and go through the university first because I know that they've chosen more reputable sources, and I'll have access to more higher level, especially within academia. But perhaps in general, I do search things on the internet, but I always try and see, like, where did I find this? When was it hosted or created? And, like, who's hosting it?
Okay. And do you believe that information found on the internet can be false or incomplete?
Coming from the country of fake news, I genuinely apologize. Yes, a lot of things can be really fake, and it's really unfortunate, and I think somehow people are losing their common sense or rationality, because I think I've seen news articles and information sources where I read the title and I'm like, that does not sound plausible. And occasionally there is a story that is truly outrageous and is unfortunately true, but I think there are certain things, or if I see something and I'm like, wow, that seems really weird, I will look into it further, not just, post it on Facebook and say, hey, look at this crazy thing. So I think a lot of people are falling victim of fake news.
And since you mentioned Facebook, do you believe that because of the multitude of social media we have at our that we have available to us anytime, direct communication and interaction have to suffer?
Yeah, I think that's true. Because I think sometimes I joke that I'm an old soul. Like, I like to have conversations with people face to face, or even like with some technology, I like to actually speak on the phone. And I would have friends that were like, why are you calling me? This is weird. We can just text. I'm like, because I want to actually hear your voice. And I think a lot more communication is happening, via created text. And I think one of the things that really suffers with that is emotions and intentions. Like, I know people have been writing letters for a long time, but I feel like we don't put as much emotion and, like, context into what we're writing, and it's often like, if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're trying to figure out, are they upset about something, it can be very difficult to tell, and people can misinterpret things, and yeah, I think the interpersonal relationships have suffered because of that.
Yes. And do you believe that internet is one of the reasons of intergenerational conflict?
You could say that. I think it's connected people on some levels. Like, I think as time goes by, because now the previous generations had experience with technology themselves, we're having an easier time to connect. I think previously it absolutely did. When you had generations that had no experience with these technologies and the generations who developed it, there was a lot of clash. But I think it's getting better now that people have a slightly more even playing field. Like, I know, like, there are people younger than us who might be watching this who know how to do things that we don't even totally understand. But yeah, on the other hand, I think that miscommunications as far as technology or just, like, feeling like you've been left behind or lost can create a lot of conflict.
And what do you think about the fact that some adolescents are searching the answers to their problem online instead of addressing their parents?
I think that's, I think there are pros and cons.
Okay.
Because it can sometimes depend on your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if there's something that you really need to know, but you don't feel comfortable talking with your parents about it, going online might be a positive thing if you can get the right information.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, I knew people who, in high school, who their parents were like, you're not mature enough to know about this. But it was something that they felt that they needed to know about it, so they ended up learning about it on their own. And who's to say whether they got the completely right information, but that may be more a part of, like, the parent-child or parent-family relationship. But I also think kids can get themselves in trouble is if they get wrong information, or if, you know, they're having trouble with their mental health or emotionally and they get the wrong feedback from the internet and they do things to harm themselves or get into bad habits, whereas maybe if they had talked to an adult or something like that, they would have gotten better feedback. It might have been difficult, but they might have gotten better feedback. So I think it's really mixed. And I know that people are creating websites where they're trying to, like, if you don't have anyone to talk to about this, here's a source that they're trying to, you know, check and make sure that it's good information. But I would hope that maybe more parents are realizing that you have to be more open about things, because kids are going to ask questions. They need information, and just telling them no isn't really an option anymore.
Yeah. And what do you believe would be the minimal age that children should be allowed to enter the internet? Or should there be such a thing as?
I think it's really interesting because of how powerful the internet is. I think there should be a learning process. And, like, you know, I think it's kind of strange when you have, like, infants who are, like, doing stuff on iPads. Like, that's a little bit weird to me. But, like, maybe when they're starting school, I know kindergarten or something seems like, or maybe, you know, like, the first primary school. And, because I remember we started doing things like typing programs, or, you know, and so maybe I think it would be good if kids were, like, slowly eased into it. Like, maybe with their parents or with school, and taught, like, some responsibility, and just, like, given the idea that, like, this is a powerful thing, and that you need to understand how powerful it is, and that it can be dangerous, and it's your responsibility to protect yourself in a way. So, and I think, like, I mean, when you're a kid, I think it's okay for parents to have, you know, like, the parental controls, like, you can't go to certain websites, but maybe at a point like, if you're a teenager, they need to recognize that you are going to go online, even if it's not in your home. There is going to be some place that you will be able to go online, and that hopefully by that point you have an understanding, and you recognize the importance of proper etiquette on the internet.
Yeah. And one last thing relating to the internet. In your opinion, can internet be used as a mass manipulation instrument?
Yes, unfortunately, because, you know, I think one of the biggest things that's changed with media and news is that, you know, previously, like, well, I guess with some leeway, to get something on television or to get something published, it had to be verified to some extent and checked. But now, on the internet, for most part, anyone can post anything. And depending on how good they are at getting it dispersed, anyone can see it. And there'll be news stories that have false information, or things posted by authors who don't exist, or things posted on websites that are, like, known misinformation sites. So I think maybe part of our responsibility in being on the internet is you need to recognize this, and you need to understand that not everything you read is real, and not trust everything you read. I know that's kind of a cliche now, but I think it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook and Instagram and like social media can be wonderful for so many reasons, but it can be aggregates that easily share false information. So in a way, there's a responsibility of the internet, but I think it's also your personal responsibility to, fact check yourself.
And have you found yourself in such a situation in which you believed propagated misinformation, or I don't know, have you felt manipulated, basically?
I felt manipulated maybe more in the context of like a news story will get released, and then later in the day or the next day they'll be like, oh, well, we reported on initial information, and now I know a lot more, so the story is totally different.
Oh.
And it's like, I understand that people want to, report on things right as they happen, but if what you're reporting on turns out to be absolutely false, or like the situations where, there have been crimes and people have been outed as the criminal, and then it turned out they were completely innocent, I think that's terrible.
Going to a more positive part, might I say, I would like to tell you and the viewers at home a little bit more about our organization, Global Confederation of Romanian Students. This is a non-profit organization that has its headquarters here in Sweden, and it was founded by Romanian students that have come here a while ago and have decided to help us, the other Romanian students who wish to study abroad, help us settle in, and also help us fulfill certain conditions required by Western European states in order to benefit the money offered by these countries. And more specifically, I present to you the G.C.R.S. scholarships concept. They are not money offered by someone so that we can study, so not mecenat, but it is a right that students who study in Sweden, for example, have since 1919, and they're money offered by the state and not by the university. So the conditions are relatively simple. One must be a European citizen, study at a university, I'm sorry, and collaborate with a foreign NGO. The right is also available in other countries such as Holland, Great Britain, Denmark, and others. And but the complete list is available on our website www.gcrs.ro. You can search for more details at the internship heading. And there is much more to talk about. Therefore, I invite you to watch the TV show La Revedere, produced by my colleagues, Adriana and Dragos, who follow up right after our interview, and they are able to say specifically what it's all about. Moreover, I can also add that since we are a students' league, the students already studying abroad are organized in embassies, and these embassies are organized at the university level, so that when you go to study in Paris or London or Stockholm, or wherever there are Romanian students affiliated to our organization, then they will be helping you to, in the first months when you're unacquainted with the city or the country. The point is for this help to be transferred to the next ones. And now, since we are abroad already studying, and I would like to ask you, what are your future plans? It's a cliche question.
Yes. Still. Well, we're both at the point where we're just starting our master's program, so I don't have any definitive plans at the moment, but I'm hoping that as my program progresses, I'm going to be investigating. I'm at the point where I'm thinking I'd like to pursue a PhD in anthropology, but if through the course of the next 2 years I get contacts or opportunities who want me to work for a bit, I'd also be very open to that. I'd love to have some practical experience and then maybe in the future go back to a PhD, but I definitely want to keep pursuing what I'm doing, even if it's difficult.
Okay. And another cliche question,
Yes.
I'm sorry, but what would be the ideal job for you?
I would like to work in diplomacy.
Oh?
I currently study immigration issues and issues about very different groups, or even not so very different groups of people coming together and living in the same place, and how do we create new communities, and how do we make connections between people, and what does integration really mean? And I'm focusing on, well, there's a global refugee and immigration crisis going on, so I would love to work in some sort of diplomacy, but I don't know if that's going to be from a European perspective or back in the United States. So,
Well, you seem to have your plans
Yes.
very well formed. And one last question. How do you see yourself in 10 years, professionally and personally as well?
let's see, I'm 23, so in 10 years, 33. Ideally done with my PhD by 33. I hope so. And, yes, I'd like to be working somewhere. I'd like to be working with people. Maybe in diplomacy or maybe academically, depending on what route it takes me. I guess personally, I guess I don't want to, plan on anything, but, I know that I was born when my mother was 30. And so by 33, I'd probably like to have a family and be somewhat settled. Although in anthropology you do travel and go places, but be somewhat settled at least in a phase of my life.
I feel you.
Yes.
Yes. Settlement seems to be something many of us are searching for.
Yes. Or maybe just consistency.
Or, yeah.